Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Mealstown Alive for, and it's the last week of the month, which means it's a location episode. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure to follow my TikTok, YouTube, all the things, and share the content if you could, please. So I'm really excited about today's episode. I think that this was my favorite location out of all the ones that I have done. So today we're talking about Preston Castle, which was a boys' penitentiary out of Ione, California. And it does not disappoint. I absolutely loved it, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys about it today. So, let me first talk about the history of Preston and how it came to be. So, in 1890, the 230-acre parcel of land where Preston Castle stands was purchased for the Iron Coal and Iron Company for $30 per acre, with 100 acres donated. The goal of Preston School of Industry is what it was called, was to hopefully rehabilitate kids and have someplace separate for them to go because for the most part, at this point, they would be sent to San Quentin with adult offenders, so that probably wasn't the best. That sounds absolutely insane today, but that's what they would do. So then they got to thinking that maybe the children should be separated. So that's why they started building Preston School of Industry. The bricks for the building were made at San Quentin and Folsom prisons using sandstone that were quarried in 6 miles from Ione, and they were delivered 6,000 bricks per car. The cornerstones were laid on December 23rd, 1890, with 2,500 people in attendance. The plans for the school were pretty ambitious, with the original plans showing 77 rooms on 5 floors. The administration building, which eventually came to be called Preston Castle, would be the most significant example of the Romanesque Revival architecture. It was quite beautiful, and it still is, and the inside you could tell at one point was very fancy. On June 13th, 1894, the first wards were accepted at Preston School of Industry, and the school was proclaimed officially open on July 1st, 1894. The next year, electricity was installed by way of water wheel powered by a dynamo called a Peloton wheel for incandescent and arc lights. So now I kind of want to give you the layout of what it was floor by floor. And keep in mind that just because this is how it is now doesn't mean it was like that exactly back then, because a lot of the rooms have been repurposed over and over through the years. So just keep that in mind that just because that's what it is now doesn't mean that's always what it has been. In the basement of Preston Castle, there is the intake room, basically where wards would be admitted to Preston, the plunge pool, which we will definitely talk about, a playroom, staff kitchen, showers, and another room where they're assuming that they had a workshop. The first floor had an infirmary, administration offices, where now it's a museum, a staff dining room, staff apartments, a bathroom, the superintendent's apartment, and a post office. The second floor had a boys' dormitory where they had around 60 to 70 boys for this large room, more staff apartments, and a library. Now, the third and fourth floor, it's unaccessible because they're still trying to renovate Preston. So some of the floors have caved in, so you cannot get to the third and fourth floor. But from what I'm told, the third floor was pretty much all apartments. And I did hear from one of our guides that they had read that it had been a tuberculosis ward, but I couldn't confirm that. And the fourth floor was unfinished attic space with a couple more apartments in the center. But again, I can't access that area, so we were not up on the third and fourth floor at all. I also want to point out that there were other buildings on the Preston Castle grounds that I'm not really going to talk about, but I wanted to point out that they're there. There's also a solitary building, an assembly building, and a couple other places like a church. So I'm not going to be talking about those other areas since they're not accessible to the public. So I couldn't get very much information about them. So I want to give you an idea about what it was like for these boys. As I said earlier, they were taken to the intake room, which is kind of to the side of the castle, and this is technically part of the basement. They would come in and they would give their paperwork, and right after, their heads would be shaved and they would be shoved into the plunge pool. Now, I'm sure you're like, what is the plunge pool? So, it looks like a mini Olympic pool almost. It has a deep end and a shallow end. And I'm sure at first you're thinking, like, that's not that bad. Well, the purpose of the plunge pool was to keep disease and mites and lice and things like that from spreading. So there were chemicals in this plunge pool. The boys would be shoved into this plunge pool in an attempt to keep things cleaner. But the problem was that, one, they had no idea what sort of chemicals they were getting into. It still reads to this day for a high amount of chemicals, they're just not sure what they used, and it did not matter if these boys couldn't swim. If they couldn't swim, they would still shove them in anyway, and they were just pushed through the pool with a stick, which just sounds absolutely barbaric. After they went through their head being shaved and going through the plunge pool, they would get a uniform and would be assigned an area. And most of the boys were expected to pick a trade to learn about, so they would work during the day. Now, before I go into that, most people assume that all of these boys had committed a crime, and that's not true at all. Some of these boys were long term orphans where they didn't really know what to do with them, and other times they were just straight up abandoned by their parents at Preston or just facilities in general. So keep in mind that just because these boys were at Preston does not mean that they necessarily did anything wrong. And it seems like the vast majority of the crimes that they committed were burglary. There's a sign up in the museum that broke my heart. It said, Rainsford was sent to the school for 4 years for taking $1 from his aunt. Now, this is back in 1914, according to this picture. But even converted from the money then until now, that's only $50. So, could you imagine a little boy being sent to basically prison for 4 years over $50, and that was it? I should also mention that the ages of these boys ranged anywhere from 6 years old to 24 years old, and they still did separate them by age groups. So, as I said, the boys were expected to learn different trades because one thing that set Preston apart was that they really wanted to rehabilitate these boys to be better people for society. Now, I don't know how much that worked. 90 out of 100 of these boys would go back to prison. So, take that with a grain of salt. But they did teach boys how to be a tailor, a cook, blacksmith, laundry, printing facility, farming, brick making and construction. Later on, they also added auto mechanics, wood shop, barbers, plumbing, and electrical. So they did teach a lot of useful skills, so hopefully they could be successful when they did get out. Now, as great as this sounds, we obviously know that there was a lot of abuse that took place as well. So, in the back of the castle, there is this hitching post in the corner. And basically, if you look down from these windows, you can see the corner. And this is where they would hitch boys up to the corner of the building, and that's where they would flog the boys and they would force the other wards to watch. So it was definitely something that they did to make an example out of them. It was also reported that they used starvation and just violence in general to punish them. In fact, in 1923, a reporter named Leon Adams actually went undercover as one of the wards and disobeyed on purpose to see what would happen. And essentially, he was put into solitary confinement. He picked a fight with another boy, and basically, the guards didn't do anything about it. They just let him fight until they couldn't fight anymore, and then they used starvation tactics, and then finally, when he was out of solitary, he had to stand on a line for over 10 hours, so it was pretty brutal, and he also brought to light that the hygiene quality was not great at Preston, so there was also a lot of negatives to this place as well. There were some famous people who did pass through Preston Castle as wards, two of which were actors, Rory Calhoun and Eddie Anderson, and most people know the name Merle Haggard. He was also a ward at Preston Castle at one point. He tried to escape twice, one of which he was semi successful, but he was caught shortly after. And the Preston Castle Foundation actually reached out to Merle Haggard shortly before he died, asking if he would do a fundraiser there, and he said, "I want nothing to do with that place." So, obviously, it was not a good experience, but to be fair, Merle Haggard went to a lot of different prisons in his life. I think I read that he escaped from multiple different prisons, so I guess that wasn't super surprising. So let's talk about some of the superintendents and the deaths that happened at Preston Castle. So the very first superintendent was Carl Bank. He was appointed when it opened and he was removed May 1897. From my understanding, he was pretty cruel and he didn't last very long. The very first death that happened at Preston was Adolf Antron. He died February 20th, 1895 from sickness. Grant Walker died on May 17th, 1898 by typhoid fever, but it also says that he died from an accidental burn resulting in intestinal ulceration. So these are definitely some serious discrepancy there. So most of what the deaths that I'm going to talk to you about are unnatural deaths, but I wanted to add that in the first death because I felt like it was important. Like something's definitely not adding up there. I also wanted to talk about there was a superintendent named Edward O'Brien. He was appointed sometime in 1897, right after the first superintendent was removed. And he didn't even last a year, but he was known as a tyrant and a piece of work. It seemed like everybody hated this guy. While he wasn't there very long, he definitely made his mark as an awful person. Now, I'm not going to talk about every superintendent that was at Preston, but I will mention about a couple ones. And the only positive one that I really could find was about C.D. Riddick from December 1900 to 1904. It was said this was the most peaceful time at Preston, and people were legitimately sad that he was leaving. So that was the only positive one that I could really find about any of them. I'm also not mentioning every single death that happened at Preston. There were many, many deaths where it was caused by sickness or some other natural causes. I'm mainly telling you guys about the suspicious deaths or just murders in general. Herman Huber died October 17th, 1911. At the time, staff was ringing the dinner bell. Herman and another friend, John, attempted to escape the school in the dark. The night watchman, J.D. French, went after them. Although French claimed to only shoot a warning shot to sound the alarm so the superintendent would know something was happening, another ward, Ernest Reed, claimed that he watched French shoot Herman in cold blood. So I guess we'll never really know if it was done on purpose or not. Tahima Van died on June 6, 1914. It was reported that him and a couple other wards went down to the swimming pond after they finished their supper to go swimming. Captain Enright told the boys that if they could not swim very well to stay in the shallow end of the pond. Tahima claimed that he could swim dog fashion just before he dove in head first. The boys who witnessed the incident said that he came up once for air, raised his hand and arms in a panic just before he went under and never resurfaced. The two boys, Robert Rains and Albert Rubidoux, tried to dive in after him, but no avail. It wasn't until the next morning that they were able to retrieve his body, and he is one of the wards that are buried at the Preston Cemetery. Frank Cardarella died February 12th, 1917. He was found in his cell, dangling from a water pipe above him. He had ripped his sleeping shirt into pieces and fashioned for himself a makeshift noose in which he used to commit suicide. The day before, he had been suffering from seizures due to epilepsy. Instead of the staff sending him to the infirmary to be treated, they took him back to his cell and left him there. So, unfortunately, he just didn't know how to handle his epilepsy, and he felt like that was the easiest way out. Sam Goines died April 19th, 1919. After escaping the school, Sam made his way to Thornton Ranch northeast of Lodi. He threatened to kill anybody who attempted to apprehend him, and J.E. Kelly, who had gone after Sam, shot aiming at Sam's leg to stop him. But at the same moment Sam was attempting to jump over the wire fence, he tripped. As he fell, the bullet hit him in the back, and unfortunately, this would be fatal. The staff brought him back to Preston, and he lived a short time on his way there, but died shortly after arriving. He did admit to the men who apprehended him that he knew it was his fault for the accident and that it wasn't J.E. Kelly's fault for why he passed away. Manuel Vargas died January 29th, 1922. He was cleaning the stables of one of the horse's stalls, and unfortunately, it spooked the horse somehow, and the horse ended up kicking him in the head, which would prove fatal, and unfortunately, he passed away shortly after. I also want to mention this would be during the time where we would have the longest running superintendent, Otto H. Close. He started in 1920 and he left in 1945. Now, I couldn't really find any information about who was the superintendent after that, but he was definitely by far the longest reigning superintendent. It does seem like in the earlier years there were a lot of suspicious deaths under him, but I couldn't really find any more information than that. Frank Eilers died May 13th, 1922. So Frank had only arrived at Preston on May 6th, so a little over a week beforehand. He had been in a motorcycle accident just prior to him being sentenced to Preston, but his injuries were worse than they expected, and after he arrived to Preston, he went straight to the hospital and died a short week later. They did say in one of the things that I read that he had an abscess on the brain. I don't know how true that is, but clearly it was complications from the accident that he had been in. Ray Baker died July 26, 1924. He tried to escape and attacked a guard named Thomas Dooley by choking him. During the struggle, Dooley managed to get his pistol out and he shot Baker. The ward died 10 minutes after arriving to the hospital. Leland Price died December 1924. During the middle of a Saturday night football game at Preston, a fight between wards Edgar Hugh and Leland Price broke out. As punishment, the two were locked in a basement alone. The fight resumed, and at some point, Price was knocked down or slipped, fracturing his skull on the concrete floor. He fell into a coma from which he never recovered and died the following morning. When I read this, it immediately made me think of the reporter who talked about how the guards would encourage them to keep fighting each other, because this was just a short year later after that journalist went undercover. So obviously, that was definitely a thing that was still going on at that time. William Reppert and Henry Herstein died December 4th, 1928. While digging a sewer ditch on the property, 6 boys were buried alive when the trench the boys were digging in caved in. 4 of the boys were saved, but both William and Henry perished in the ground. Their bodies were recovered, and Henry's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the school. I'm not sure how successful they were, but I just know that they did file one. Now, this was not a ward or staff member who passed away here, but I wanted to mention it. So, Preston Castle had its own hospital, and sometimes that was the closest hospital to anybody. So, it wasn't just wards and staff who were treated there. There was also, in times of an emergency, other people and just the public that came in to get treated. Liberto Mendez died February 13th, 1932. He was working at the Kennedy mine in Jackson, California. Two of his other coworkers were killed instantly during an explosion. The fourth was badly injured, and he unfortunately died at Preston later on. Bessie Lewis was attacked October 29th, 1921. Four boys knocked her down and beat her head into the concrete. After she was unconscious, they tied her up, gagged her, and stole her keys. She did regain consciousness an hour later, and the boys were brought back safely. I'm assuming that she survived because there are no accounts of her death, and I'm sure that I would have found that. But I wanted to mention it because it seems like this story and the story of Anna Corbin get mixed up a little bit in the details because they happened about 29 years apart, which isn't super far. Now I want to tell you about the story of Anna Corbin. So, Anna Corbin was head of housekeeping and she passed away February 23rd, 1950. She was beaten to death and she was found in the basement. Now, before I go any further, there is a very big misconception that she was found in the pantry of the staff kitchen. That's not true. She was found in a basement storeroom where the plunge bath is. She was in the wrong storage closet, basically, but most people seem to think that she was found in the kitchen staff room. She allegedly walked in on two wards, Eugene Monroe and William Mercer, in the middle of acts of sexual perversion, and Monroe killed her to keep her from talking about it. Now, Anna's killer was never technically caught. We're pretty sure that Eugene Monroe did kill her because he went on to unalive other women and he confessed to other inmates about it, but there just wasn't enough evidence to convict him. They tried twice and the jury just couldn't find a reason to convict him. So unfortunately, he did get away with this, but he would end up in prison later on. Now, one thing about Anna is that she was extremely beloved. So she was very much a mother figure to these boys. And it was even said that the other wards wanted to know who hurt her because they wanted to seek revenge. She was very loved. Another couple misconceptions about Anna is that some people believe that Anna lived at the castle. And while there were staff apartments, Anna did not live at the castle. She had her own property, and I'm not going to say the address on here because I don't want people going and looking because there are people that live there and I don't want them to be disturbed. But no, she did not live at the castle. She had her own home. Another misconception that's talked about is that Anna's spirit is at Preston. I do not believe that Anna's spirit is there. Neither does the paranormal investigation team that runs Preston. I believe that Anna is at peace. And the people who own her home now say that she is not there and it is not haunted. Her family also believes that she is at peace. So you will not find Anna at Preston Castle. Now, when Preston was closed in 1960, the plan was to demolish it. So the government basically told everybody, you can come in and take whatever you want. So that's exactly what they did. So they removed most of the roof. Many parts of the castle were just taken and it was left to disarray. A group of ladies fought to not have it demolished, and they founded the Preston Castle Foundation, which is the group that now owns Preston, and they got the deed in 2014. Now, because so many people took different things at that point, the building went to major disarray. As I said earlier, the third and fourth floor you can't access because it's not safe. different parts of the tour are not safe, so they have it blocked off so you can't get through to there. But this foundation is really trying to fix it. So one of the first things that they did was put a new roof on, and the guides told me that it was over almost a half a million dollars just to put on a new roof. Because keep in mind, this is a historical location, so they have to adhere to certain policies. Now, I do want to say that every single person that I came into contact with at Preston was just a joy to speak to. This place is mainly volunteer run. I'm not even sure if they have any paid employees. So, like, keep that in mind. Be kind to them. They obviously love what they do there, and they're taking time out of their free time to be there. So, please be nice to them. Everyone that I talked to loved answering questions and talking to me about the history of the place, so the volunteers definitely love being there. They're also doing many other things to renovate, like they just put in new porches, they made sure that the structure itself was stable so that way they could continue to build. They just put sprinkler systems in the building so that way they're safe in case of a fire. They're doing a lot to renovate the building. In fact, if you want to help out, three-fourths of the profit that they get to renovate Preston is from their Halloween haunt that they run every year. The other fourth is mainly from their paranormal investigations. So if you would like to contribute, go ahead and pay them a visit. They also do day tours, but it's just not as much revenue, so it doesn't help as much. You can also purchase a brick for them if you want to be part of history. So if you can do any of those things, I highly recommend it. This will not be the last time that I go to Preston. Another interesting fact about this place is that because a lot of the building is still open and they're renovating, there are over 1 million bats living in Preston. Yes, you heard that right. There's these little itty bitty brown bats, and there's over a million. You can hear them during the day in certain parts of the building. And at night, when I was there for the paranormal investigation, a lot of times you would just see them, flying around the building, which definitely added to the atmosphere. There's also a family of barn owls that are living up in the tower that I saw coming and going. So I thought that was really cool that they don't disturb them since it's going to take a while for them to renovate. Now, if you want to hear about my paranormal experience, that will be on next week's episode because there was so much to talk to you about just with the history that I decided to break it up. So if you just wanted the history, then, like this was the perfect video for you. But if you also like the paranormal experiences, I'll be breaking down the things that I saw and that our guides have told us that I'll be going over as well. Like I said, I highly recommend doing their paranormal investigation tour. It was worth every penny. So now going over the food. While I was in the staff kitchen or near the staff kitchen, they have an old archive menu from 1912 of what the boys had in a day. So I decided to recreate Sunday's meal. The first off on the list would be pearled barley and some like milk or coffee with bread. Dinner would be roast beef, gravy, boiled potatoes, bread pudding with the lemon sauce, and some candy. And then supper was vegetable soup, crackers, and pie. Now, I'm assuming that I probably made a nicer version of what the boys got because it was probably a lot more bland and probably smaller portions, but this was just to give you an idea about what they got. Preston itself was pretty self sufficient. They had their own farm, they had their own slaughterhouses, so the boys pretty much prepared everything in the trades standpoint. Some things that I learned. So back in 1912, bread pudding was a very big staple. It was considered the poor man's dessert because it uses stale bread to make it. So it was really popular back then, but it was really, really beloved. And I can't agree more because it was delicious. As far as the candy goes, I'm sure that it was probably one, maybe two pieces, but some common candies back then were like lemon drops, peppermint twists, or horehound. So it was mostly like hard candies. Hershey was in business in 1900, so it is possible that there was some chocolate, but it was probably still expensive, and especially since chocolate melts, I'm not sure how often they would have gotten that. So that was just some side note that I learned. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and thanks for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, find me on TikTok, YouTube, all the things, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.